Before the first bullet was ever fired from an MG42, the Germans knew they were building something that would alter the battlefield. A weapon capable of firing over 1,200 rounds per minute made the ears ring and nerves tremble. Its roar sounded like tearing canvas, and Allied soldiers later called it the buzzing saw. This opening explores why the men behind the trigger faced not only their enemies, but the curse of their own machine. The story begins in the late 1930s when the Wehrmacht realized that its prized MG34 would never be built in the numbers needed. The MG34 was reliable and accurate, yet took too much time and steel to manufacture. German engineers looked for a solution in stamped steel and a roller locking system that would cut production time in half. The result was a gun that weighed a manageable 11.5 kilograms and used fewer precision parts than its predecessor. From its first trials, the MG42 impressed commanders with a rate of fire that outmatched most machine guns. Enemy soldiers were stunned by the sheer volume of bullets it could produce, while still being portable by a 6-man team. The standard German squad of 10 men now revolved around one gun instead of many rifles. Each member had a role from loader and assistant gunner to ammunition carriers and squad leader, ensuring the gun stayed fed and cooled. The MG42 barrel would glow cherry red after a few hundred rounds, so the assistant gunner had to change it quickly. In skilled hands, the swap took only a few seconds using a side door in the receiver and an insulated mitt. Each squad carried multiple spare barrels and hundreds of rounds of linked ammunition that weighed down the carriers. The rapid fire meant that ammunition stocks could disappear in minutes if the gun was not used with discipline. Early training films warned crews against firing long bursts because overheating would warp the barrel and ruin accuracy. German doctrine therefore emphasized short bursts at a rate of around 150 rounds per minute. Allied troops soon learned to attack during barrel changes when the gun was silent. German crews countered by practicing smooth changes and by working in pairs so that one gun could cover while the other cooled. As the war progressed, the MG42 appeared in more units, replacing the MG34 as the main infantry automatic weapon. Production numbers reached hundreds of thousands as factories across Germany stamped out receivers and pressed barrels. This expansion placed the MG42 in the hands of less trained crews who sometimes let the gun climb and waste ammunition. Still, the sheer firepower often compensated for inexperience and kept enemy troops pinned down behind whatever cover they could find. American and British soldiers described the psychological impact of hearing that distinctive ripping sound. It was a mechanical scream that could freeze a platoon on open ground, even if the bullets missed. The German propaganda machine celebrated the weapon, but inside the squads, men called it the bone saw because of its ability to cut through timber and flesh. They both respected and feared the gun for its power and the responsibility it demanded. By 1943, German squads generally had one MG42 for every 10 men. Some elite units, such as paratroopers and mountain troops, carried additional guns for greater concentration of fire. Each gun required a crew that moved as a single organism through mud and snow across Europe and North Africa. The gunners shared a bond forged under the roar of the barrel and the strain of carrying belts of cartridges over long marches. The high rate of fire came at a cost to logistics. Supply officers strained to deliver enough 7.92mm Mauser cartridges to frontline units, especially on the Eastern Front, where rail lines were often cut. To feed a gun that could burn through 600 rounds in minutes required horses, trucks, and trains. When supply lines broke, crews sometimes scavenged ammunition from captured weapons or switched to single fire with their rifles. The design of the MG42 also forced changes in Allied tactics. Infantry platoons learned to spread out and avoid bunching up where a single burst could inflict heavy casualties. Armourers developed thicker foxholes and concrete emplacements to protect against the penetrating power of the gun. In urban combat, soldiers waited for the moment the barrel change occurred to rush across streets or alleys. By mid-war, the MG42 was mounted on vehicles ranging from half-tracks to tanks, as well as on tripods for sustained fire. Its portability meant that panzer grenadiers could quickly establish defensive positions with a wall of bullets. The machine gun was also adapted for anti-aircraft use, with dual mounts that attempted to track low-flying aircraft. Though less effective than dedicated weapons, it was better than nothing when Allied fighters swooped overhead. As Allied armies advanced into Italy and France, they encountered MG42 nests in hedgerows and stone farmhouses. Veterans recalled the dread of moving into a field where every rustle could be answered by a burst from an unseen barrel. Why did soldiers nickname this weapon a curse despite its advantages? The next section delves into the toll the MG42 took on its own crews as well as on its enemies. Operating the gun was physically exhausting. The weight of the gun tripod ammunition and spare barrels added up to more than 40 kilograms that had to be moved over rough terrain. Carrying teams often suffered back injuries and fatigue, yet they continued because the gun was vital to their survival. In rain and mud, the belts would jam, so the crews had to keep them clean and dry using oil and covers. The recoil was sharp, and the gun tended to climb when fired prone or from the hip. Seasoned gunners learned to push down on the buttstock and apply controlled bursts to keep the stream of bullets on target. The MG42 lacked a semi-automatic mode, which meant that single shots were impossible. This reduced the precision at longer ranges, but emphasized its role as a suppressive weapon rather than a marksman tool. Machine gun posts were prime targets for artillery and snipers. Crews learned to change positions frequently and to camouflage their gun with branches and earth to avoid detection by enemy spotters. In the intense heat of battle, the gunner and assistant had to coordinate without words. A gentle tap signaled a barrel change while the assistant kept a new belt ready to feed as soon as the old one ran dry. The War Department of the United States produced a training film to familiarize soldiers with the distinctive sound of the MG42. In the film, the narrator calls the gun the buzzing saw and tries to desensitize recruits to its terrifying cadence. American engineers attempted to copy the design, but found it difficult to match the combination of stamped metal and roller locking. Post-war, they incorporated aspects of the gun into the M60, which combined German and British design features. Other countries such as Yugoslavia and Spain produced their own versions of the gun using the same core mechanism. The Yugoslav M53 and Spanish CE-TME variants kept the rate of fire high and proved reliable in harsh conditions. Meanwhile, the modern German army developed the MG3 by adapting the MG42 to the NATO cartridge. This weapon continues to serve in many countries, demonstrating the lasting influence of the original wartime design. The legacy extends beyond the machine guns themselves. Doctrine emphasizing a squad centered on a powerful automatic weapon influenced post-war infantry tactics globally. In the closing months of the war, MG42s defended shrinking fronts in Italy and Germany. Many were used by Volkssturm units composed of older men and boys with little training trying to halt armies of tanks and artillery. After the war, thousands of captured guns found new homes. Soviet forces shipped them to China, where they were used in civil war, while French forces carried them in Indochina and Algeria. Collectors and historians today admire the craftsmanship of the stamped parts and the ingenuity of the quick change system. At reenactments, the ripping sound still turns heads, even though the gun fires blanks. For many veterans, the sound still echoes in memories of hedgerows and foxholes. Survivors of both sides agree that the MG42 remains one of the most fearsome weapons ever carried by infantry. What made this gun both a lifesaver and a liability for the men who used it? As we explore the inner workings and the human stories, we find answers in the steel and sweat. To understand why the MG42 came with a curse, we need to look at the maintenance it demanded. The roller locking system was robust, but the gun would not function if dirt clogged its receiver or if springs became weak. Crews spent hours each evening cleaning the gun under tarpaulins by lantern light. They scrubbed carbon from the barrel and inspected rollers for wear, knowing that a single failure could doom them in the next fight. Spare parts were scarce in the later war years. Gunners sometimes cannibalized broken guns to keep one firing while sending the damaged one back to a depot. During retreats, crews often buried their guns or destroyed them to prevent capture. Some disassembled the weapon into pieces to carry more easily, while others simply smashed the receiver against rocks. The curse also lay in the weight of expectation. A gunner knew that his comrades relied on him to hold the line or cover a withdrawal. If he flinched or allowed the gun to overheat, his unit could be overrun. Many MG42 gunners became casualties because their distinctive muzzle flash and sound drew concentrated fire. Snipers aimed for the gunner first, followed by the assistant to silence the weapon. Allied training manuals taught soldiers to aim at the flash and throw grenades into suspected machine gun nests. This forced the crews to dig deeper positions and to shield themselves with logs and sandbags. Firing the MG42 continuously created enormous heat, and even with barrel changes, the receiver and bipod grew dangerously hot. Third-degree burns were not uncommon despite gloves and mitts. When the war ended, gunners often reflected on the contradictions of their weapon. It was both a marvel of engineering and a heavy burden to bear under fire. From the fields of Normandy to the steppes of Russia, the MG42 cut a path of devastation. Its sound became part of the soundtrack of the war, but the men behind it rarely escaped unscathed. Although the design improved production efficiency, it never fully resolved the human cost. The crews paid with exhaustion and fear, and sometimes with their lives. Can a machine embody both genius and tragedy at once? The MG42 stands as an answer to that question, showing how innovation can sharpen the double-edged sword of war. Today, militaries value suppressive fire and modular design because of lessons learned from weapons like the MG42. The gun's lineage continues in modern belt-fed weapons that balance rate of fire with weight and reliability. Historians note that the MG42 forced armies to rethink how squads operate and how much ammunition they carry. It influenced how infantry support weapons evolved long after the war. In popular culture, the gun sound has appeared in films and games. While entertainment simplifies war, the real weapon remains a grim reminder of industrialized killing. At memorials, former gunners and their opponents sometimes meet. They share stories of fear and respect, and remember comrades who fell to bullets and artillery. The machine gun has many names, but its essence is the same. It channels the industrial might and desperation of a nation at war into a stream of lead. As the decades pass, fewer veterans remain to recount the gun's true nature. Their testimonies remind us that behind every weapon lies a human face with a story of duty and survival. In telling this story, we honor those who carried the gun and those who faced it across no man's land. The MG42 was a curse not because it failed, but because its success came at such a high price. This video is intended solely for educational and documentary purposes. It contains no ideology or propaganda.